lot of times I would think to myself, I don't really have a story. I grew up in a great family. I was blessed. I had a lot of wonderful things. And I realized much later in life that I did have a story. And it was different than others. And that's how I really started preaching and teaching about finding your authentic path. When I was 18, I got a scholarship to go to college. I was so excited. It was everything that I had dreamed of. And so I got to college, and I was probably the most excited student to be in English class, right? Like everyone else was like, English. I'm like, I am ready. I've got my pad of paper. This was before the computers. I've got my pen. I'm ready to go. I write my first paper. I'm like, yes. I get it back in class. Teacher lays it down, face down. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Flip it over. Oh, that's why I have a D-. And I was shocked. I'm like, a D-? I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a sports writer. I can't have a D-. I'm a good writer. At least so I thought so. So I thought, well, I'll go to the teacher. I'll talk to them, and I will find out how to fix this. So I go to my teacher. I say, hey, how can I be a better writer? And he looks at me and says, Julie, you're just not smart enough to be in college. You should drop out. And I was shocked. I was like, what? What do you mean? I have a full ride scholarship. I can't drop out. So I go to my dorm room and I do what any good woman does. I called my mother and I cried. My mother said, what any good mother would say, he's an idiot, go get a tutor. So I did. And I passed that class with, I think, a C. And so it was my first time that I had really faced someone telling me that I wasn't good enough. And it was really interesting to me because words are so powerful, right? When someone says something to you, even though it may not seem like it was mean, maybe they said something, oh, it's not a big deal. Words are powerful. How many of us have actually had someone say something and we believe it? I have, absolutely, right? So here I'm fighting with this thing in my head that I'm not smart enough. And it's not the first teacher to tell me that either. By my senior year, I'd found out I was dyslexic. But at that point, I was like, well, we're almost done, so we're just going to fight through this. So I started, hearing this in my mind. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. And so my thought was, well, I will prove it to them. So I went on to get a master's. At age 23, I became a college professor. At age 25, I was head coaching for a college, which was a very young age. I moved on and got my doctorate by the time I was 29. And I was teaching doctorate students and dean over 20 universities by the time I was 31. Not bad, right? I thought, I'm smart enough. But I just kept going because in my mind I kept hearing, you're not smart enough. So I just kept going and fighting and fighting. That's why I have like an 8-page resume. But as I kept going, I got to the final job, right? I was dean over 20 universities, 31 years old, beat everyone out. I was like, this is it. I have made it, right? I'm in this job for 3 months, and I suddenly go, I hate this job. It was the worst job. It wasn't anything that I had wanted. I was so stressed out that I was losing hair. I wasn't sleeping. I had a newborn, but that wasn't the reason I wasn't sleeping. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week from home because it was a remote job. I had a couple women bosses who would just call me daily and say, you're not good enough. You're not doing it. We're going to fire you soon. I hope you pull it together. And I would get this barrage, so much so that I was at the doctor, and the doctor said, if you don't change jobs, you're going to have a heart attack at the age of 32 because you are so stressed out. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is what everyone told me I was supposed to do. This was my path. And so then I kind of had this identity crisis. I come home to my husband, God bless him, and I go, I think I want to quit my job that I make a lot of money at. And he kind of smiled at me and said, as long as you can find another one. And so, I thought there and I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? If I quit, everyone's going to think I'm a failure. I got this big job. I convinced everyone that I could do the job, which I could do the job. But at the time, when that barrage was happening and I was trying to figure out what to do, I realized that was the last thing that I wanted to do. So I took a really big step. I quit my job, which was really difficult to do. In fact, quitting my job was more stressful than doing the job. So I quit my job, and I had a very great mentor at the time who said, Julie, I'll hire you on almost full-time to teach at my college, but I want you to get into those businesses and start really going after your businesses. And little did she know how great advice that was. 'Cause she said, you can own this, go after your businesses. So I thought, all right, let's do that. That was probably about maybe 8 years ago. So I took these little businesses that I had and I started ramping them up, and I started doing all the things that I love to do. And I started realizing that my authentic path, even though, don't get me wrong, I love teaching and I love working with students, was so much more than just that one thing. I realized I wasn't a one-trick pony. I was told, and my colleague Karen as well, that we didn't have a voice for radio. I don't know, we do podcast radio shows now, all sorts of stuff. I was told I was a bad writer. I don't know how many books we published now, but plenty. And we made the top 60 list of leadership books for Inc. So as I look at our authentic path, I think to myself, and I want you to ask yourself this, how often have you followed a path that seemed like that was just what everyone told you to do? I mean, how many times have we done that, right? When I was young, people would say, you know, teaching's a good profession for a young lady. And I'd say, well, that's great, but I should not be an elementary teacher. I'm not good at that. And I'd keep telling it over, and I'd say, well, I really want to go into business. You know, women just don't do business. And so as I looked at my authentic path, and it took me several years to figure out what I really wanted to do and where I wanted to go, I want to challenge you all for a second. Now, in your bags, there's a pen and a paper. And if you want to take that paper out, I'd like you to write down a few things, because I think this is really important. So the first thing is that I want you to write down, what are some lies that you have told yourself? Maybe those lies are, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not pretty enough. What are some lies? I want you to write those down. Be honest with yourself. You don't have to show anyone else. But what are some lies that you have told yourself over time that you know is not true? Or maybe you don't want it to be true. But what are some of those lies? And I want you to think about that for a minute, and we'll come back to that. But when we talk about lies and what we're doing, very often our society tells us these lies, right? We're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not pretty enough. And then we look at things and we think, why in the world do we have such a high depression and suicide rate? Because we listen to the things of society. So I want to share a story with you about a woman who absolutely defied all of what her society wanted her to do. And I think this might help you as you look at your authentic path. This woman was frail. She was very light-skinned, red hair, and she wasn't expected to live. In fact, when she was 2 years old, her mother was beheaded, and she was declared a bastard child. And she lived pretty much in a prison for most of her life until she turned 21. And then by fate, she ended up becoming the Queen of England. And her name is Elizabeth I. She was a very unique woman because in that time, women were expected, if they were put into a queen position, to right away find someone to marry. And she was expected to marry someone from a foreign country to create alliances. But Elizabeth, despite being locked up in a prison most of her life, was very smart and very educated. And she knew that as soon as she married someone from another country, she would lose all her power and all her ability to fix her country, which was desperately in disarray. And so Elizabeth decided she wasn't going to marry, which went against every norm. Who was going to be her successor? She needed to have a baby. That was the other thing. She was expected to get pregnant right away so she could have a successor, but she chose not to. She surrounded herself with the best and the brightest. She was strong enough to ride into battle with her people, but kind enough to walk through the streets and talk with the commoners, which was not done by any royal family. She read lots of books, and she actually had a 40-year reign, and in that day and age, most people died in their 30s. But yet she found ways, the smartest ways, and she was open to letting people give her ideas that went against the norm. In a time where when you went against the norm, you were beheaded. Her sister, which many of you may have heard of, called Bloody Mary, was known for just beheading anyone who had a disagreement with her. And it was literally like, off with their head. Thank goodness we don't do that today, right? We'd be losing a lot of heads. So Elizabeth decided that she had to make change. She had to go against all the norms, because if she didn't, their country was going under. And the only way she could save it was to change the way that people thought. Now, it didn't happen overnight, because we all know that change is terrifying and it's scary. And when we want to change something, even if it's something you know you need to change, it can be really tough to change. But Elizabeth, over her 40-year reign, made their country one of the strongest countries in that time in history out of all the world. They were dominating it because she learned that her leadership style, although very different from her male counterparts in the kings, was making change. She believed in people, she believed in change, and she believed that if they could see the change and the love that she had for her country, that they would be willing to change. And so Elizabeth is someone who really sticks out to me because she lived in a time, not close to our time, that if you were sick, they thought the best thing to do was, just cut open your arm and let the blood drain out. Eventually, the sickness would go away as well as you. There wasn't a lot of intelligence happening at that time. So Elizabeth made change despite all the things against her. So I want you to go back to that list that you made. So you wrote down the lies about yourself. Now I want you to flip it over, go to the next page, and write down the truths about yourself. That you are good enough, you are pretty enough, you look just fine the way that you are, that you can do whatever it is that you said you couldn't do. What are the truths to those lies? Because it's so important that you speak those truths, even if it's on a piece of paper. Because at some point, we have to be able to realize that those lies are lies, and that the way we change those is to speak those truths. The last thing I want to challenge you with is, what is something you're doing that is not truly your authentic path? And can you add that in? Now, am I saying go quit your job and just go do what you want to do tomorrow? No, we all have lives, we all have families, we all have bills. But how can you take a step to get closer to your authentic path? That is my challenge to you. What is something you love? Now, when I switched out of academia, it didn't happen overnight. I still taught part-time while I built up my businesses. I still did what we called the side hustle, a lot of things like that, because I knew I couldn't just overnight drop my entire income and leave my family hanging. But I started moving in that direction. And was it terrifying? Absolutely. I thought for a moment I was having a mental breakdown. My poor husband, once again, I was like, honey, I need a day off from everyone. And he was like, okay, should I call someone? I'm like, no, just let me get through this day. And I took a day off of just from life. I left all the babies with them, everything, God bless them, and was like, oh, I promise I'm coming back. Because I was trying to figure out how I was going to make that transition because it was terrifying. Especially when you have people who constantly tell you that you are not good enough, that you're not worthy enough, and you don't deserve to sit at the table. But did anyone read Sheryl Sandberg's book? If you haven't, it's a great book. She says, you deserve to sit at the table, so go get a chair and sit on up there and stop sitting in the back of the room. So as you guys go throughout today, and you listen to all these amazing speakers who are going to bring so many different stories of empowerment that I know will touch you, I want to challenge you to see how you can move in your authentic path. If you are in your authentic path, that is amazing. Please share that with me. But if you're thinking like, this is my job, Julie, but I really think this is my passion, then I want to encourage you to see how you can take steps. It won't happen overnight. My path has been a long journey, but I think for you, if you take that step, it will help make change in your life. It will bring joy to you. It will take those lies that you've written down on that one side of paper and change them into truths. So today, I hope that you will take time to think about what your authentic path is and how you can make change. Thank you so much.